Testing, testing. Good.
It's testing.
Anybody who cares to hear in the back, can they also hear? Awesome, thank you. Okay, I guess we're starting. Oh man, okay. Well, thanks everyone for being here, obviously. It means a lot to me. It's, it's not a light subject, right? And in researching and getting ready for tonight, one of the things that struck me is, it's kind of a bummer, but there's nobody under this roof who hasn't been touched deeply by loss. Because one of the things that really stood out for me in the writing and the research is that that's the price we pay for living, is living with loss. And the longer you live, the more loss you accumulate. And it's not easy, but it's a part of life. It's inextricable. So that's kind of a high price of admission to pay to hear this talk, because I'm not just talking about my favorite movies or something like that. So to listen to talk about this especially means a lot to me. I'll take a sip of scotch. I'm not the only one that I'll be taking. All right. I didn't know there was going to be a mic stand, so this is going to be fun as I thumb through my book. Actually, first, I'll do my icebreaker, which means a little boy needs to be outside. Go! So, I've been spending a lot of time at Wild Detectives. I love the place anyway, and assaulting people with information. I'm going to do a talk, you should be here. But I thought I'd be here this weekend a bunch, and I would stick my book out and let people notice it, and then I would walk over to them and tell them, interesting, you should come see my talk. So I was going to be this weekend, but I wasn't at all, because a friend of mine and his buddies throw a Comic Con type convention. And we went to that instead. It's kind of a family tradition. We hadn't been in years because of COVID and stuff. So we went back, it was fun, we're there, and there was a little breakout room where people were just reading crazy stuff, ad hoc. And I told them I hadn't practiced at all. I told them, I said, hey, I'm going to do an author's presentation in a couple days. Can I read from my book? And of course they were nice and said yes. So I ditched my original icebreaker because this is my new icebreaker. I have a problem with public speaking. I do it for a living when I have to because I'm a project manager, so luckily it got me over it. But I still have a name. I mean, it's not the normal thing, terrified. And when I was a kid, you could not force me to get up and speak. Not like the normal guy. I mean, literally, there was no point. I would just shake uncontrollably. So anyway, I said, okay, this will help me with the nerves. In Spanish, it's los nervios. And in Spanish, it means more than just your nerves. It's this thing, it's hard to explain, right? So I had the case of the nervios, of course. And I go, okay, I'll read after this person. And that person sat down. My daughter's gonna hear this, but my son won't. And read a piece of garbage dumpster erotica, which I didn't know existed, but now I do, and I'm going to inflict that knowledge upon you. It does. And if you think two people in a dumpster? No, it's worse. It's just one person and the dumpster. So I said, then I got up and read, and I was like, if I can follow that and read the most personal thing I've ever written, then I'm okay for my my event here. I didn't start my timer. Okay, this is gonna, like I said, no mic stand, I can do this.
You want a chair to put it on?
No, I'll be okay, thanks. Thank you, though. So, my introduction and conclusion, we're going to read the introduction first and the conclusion last, because that kind of makes sense, right? Together, they're the best things I've ever written. So if you don't like the sound of this, you should never buy anything I write, because this is my era stay at the moment. Introduction. Has anything in human history haunted us more than death? The reality that life ends for us and our loved ones is perhaps the most brutal truth there is. Could every religion that's ever existed be described, I only said described, as a coping mechanism for dealing with said truth? Could every philosophy be at heart an attempt to come to terms with the fundamental paradox of our existence, that we are temporary creatures in a permanent world? Perhaps. Now, the universe may have some endpoint, but for all intents and purposes, it is eternal in a way we are most definitely not. We are told our planet, a laughably insignificant piece of an incomprehensibly larger and older universe, has existed for 4.5 billion years. That's Earth. Meanwhile, the average human lifespan on that planet is currently about 73 years. I remember as a child reading an account of an attack by the US on a Native American settlement. The victims included hundreds of women and children. Their chief could do nothing to stop the slaughter. In the face of his and his people's end, he calmly folded his arms and waited. He was shot down, and in his final moments, sang his death song. Nothing lives long, only the earth and mountains. So ended the life of Cheyenne Chief White Antelope at the Sand Creek Massacre of 1846. Those simple but powerful lines succinctly encapsulate the temporal paradox described above. The seemingly permanent, whether mountains or the whole of creation, reminds us of our impermanence. How impertinent. Time then is the overlooked partner of death. Dying ends our time, and from birth, time begins our dying. Meanwhile, our species has spent much energy wondering if there is something timeless awaiting us at the end of our time. Petrarch, Francesco Petrarca, 1304 to 1374, is a man who lived in a very different world from white antelopes, and yet his art underscored the same dynamic as the chief's final actions and words. Called the father of humanism, Petrarch lived through the Black Death, and the experience informed his poetry, especially The Triumphs. This was a series of poems describing an allegorical procession of forces. 3 of the 6 poems are The Triumph of Death, The Triumph of Time, and The Triumph of Eternity. Petrarch was consumed with how we and everything we hold dear falls away. Death will take the woman he loves, and time will erase his accomplishments. Like White Antelope, he takes solace in the eternal, hence eternity triumphing over all at the end. The fables below wrestle with all of this and more. We are storytelling creatures, and each society needed a story to explain why we die. Beyond existential concerns, though, death simply fascinates us. And any story can instantly be made more dramatic. Just add death. Would Shakespeare's characters Romeo and Juliet be as well remembered if they'd survived? So, some of the stories below use death as a narrative device and no more, in a time-honored tradition. Others take a bit of revenge on the Grim Reaper. He or she may always win in reality, but anything is possible in fiction. And a tale of someone besting the avatar of our mortality can be cathartic. Meanwhile, they say laughter is the best medicine. Maybe that's why healthy doses of humor can be found as our narrators and protagonists deal with what is in some ways the ultimate disease. Fear of dying is understandable, and that manifests itself in the following pages as well. Working on this book was awfully amusing and unamusingly awful. The fun and fascination the project provided came at the price of being reminded of my lowest moments. Moments of crushing and irrevocable loss. I knew that'd be tough. White Antelope and Petrarch accomplished great things in part because they were cognizant of their approaching end. White Antelope managed to accept his bravely and with dignity, even in the face of overwhelming tragedy. Petrarch posited that eternity does await us, heaven. Yet he was obsessed with how short our time here is. He spent over 2 decades of his limited life working on the Triumphs. He raced against time and won. Editing of the last installment in the series was finished just a few months before he died. This book collects and shares stories for the sake of doing so. And yet, maybe reading about our sad subject will serve as a reminder to face our end well when the time comes, and to use our time well while we can. Dedication for Mommy and Papa. We take our parents for granted because they are our earth and mountains. We can't imagine they'll ever not be there. And that was my introduction. Yay. Thank you. So, need to lighten up the mood, and I'm going to do that by reading an original. I don't mean original like I wrote it. I'm going to lighten up the mood by reading an old ancient fairy tale that ends in mass murder. This is called, and I cannot stress this enough, this is as it was translated originally, right? The verbiage is not meant to be funny, etc. This is how it's translated. Early version, maybe the earliest version of Snow White. And notice she's not even in the title. Death of the Seven Dwarfs. By the way, I use epigraphs. That's when you take a quote from the thing and put it at the front. Because you'll notice when I stop on a phrase, somebody asked me why I wrote this book, and I said because it's cheaper than therapy. So some of these lines are just, some are brutal, some are comforting, but all of them I find really useful in my own personal, grieving process. So the line, I'm going to read the epigraph every time. No one knows what became of the girl. On one of the high plains between Brugg and Waldhust, whatever, some dramatic word, near the Black Forest, 7 dwarves lived together in a small house. Late one evening, an attractive young peasant girl, wink wink, who was lost and hungry, approached them and requested shelter for the night. The dwarves had only 7 beds, and they fell to arguing with one another, for each one wanted to give up his bed for the girl. Finally, the oldest one took the girl into his bed. Before they could fall asleep, a peasant woman appeared before the house, knocked on the door, and asked to be let inside. The girl got up immediately and told the woman that the dwarves had only 7 beds, and that there was no room there for anyone else. With this, the woman became very angry and accused the girl of being a slut, thinking that she was cohabitating with all 7 men. Threatening to make a quick end of, I told you, raise the atmosphere. Threatening to make a quick end to such evil business, she went away in a rage. That same night, she returned with 2 men, whom she had brought up from the bank of the Rhine. They immediately broke into the house and killed the 7 dwarves. They buried the bodies outside in the garden and burned the house to the ground. No one knows what became of the girl. Note, it is unlikely you failed to notice the difference in tone between this and the later Disney film, which launched the legendary animation studio, as well as their penchant for sanitizing folkloric material. In Disney's defense, the Grimm brothers also cleaned up their version of Snow White.
That's nice for you.
Wow. All right, and we're just going to lurch wildly from serious and sad to hopefully humorous. I find this story deeply moving, and I'm really glad I found it. Show of hands, who knows the parable? I think it's a Chinese parable about the man who's running from a tiger. He falls off a cliff. He grabs onto some roots and is hanging. Okay, we got one. You win a skull. Come collect your skull later.
Excellent.
So, I love folktales, fairy tales, obviously. The shared story DNA fascinates me. So here's a story from Armenia, which is clearly, akin to this. I would guess this came first. It's far less optimistic. And I've probably heard this story 1,000 times. I don't know why. The parable of the man and the elephant, Armenia. And this is the life of men. This present life is like unto a man, whom an elephant pursued in fury, and drove him to a well most terrible. And the man saw trees, upon which he held himself up. And he saw 2 mice, one black and one white, which were gnawing at the roots of the trees, upon which he was raised up. And he looked down into the well, and he saw snakes, which opened their mouths and desired to devour him. Then he looked up and saw a little honey which kept dripping from the trees. And he began to lick it up. And he no longer bethought him of the disaster into which he was fallen. But the mice ate deep into the trees, and the man fell. And the elephant caught him up, and threw him to the serpents. Now then, O son of the king, the elephant is the image of death, which pursues the sons of men. And the tree is this life. And the mice are days and nights. And the honey is the sweetness of this world. And the man is distracted by the taste of this life. Days and nights are fulfilled, and death carries him off. And in hell the serpents devour him. And this is the life of men. Sounds not terribly optimistic, but I describe a lot of these stories as coldly comforting. Not everything was better in the old days by any stretch, but I do think ancient societies had an acceptance of death and the brutality of it, and the reality of loss that's better than our gauzy, like we pretend it doesn't exist. I'm going to go off on a tangent. Somebody asked me here at Wild Detectives one time, as I was forcing people to know that I was going to do this event, what did you learn from writing the book? And they didn't have a good answer. My answer now is, we always talk about the human condition. And as far as I know, there's no Oxford English Dictionary definition for that, right? I'm a Bob Dylan fanatic. When he won the Oscar for Best Song, he thanked the Academy for having the courage to vote for a song that was honest about the human condition. So anyway,
Which song?
Things Have Changed.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
No problem. That was great. I used to love you, but things have changed. It's a very brutal song. What I've learned is, this sounds obvious at first, but bear with me. My definition of the human condition is there's 3 things. First 2 sound real obvious. We're here for a limited amount of time. We don't get to know how long that time is, and yet we stupidly act as if we didn't know those first 2 clauses were true. And that to me is modern life, pretending that we're never going to be gone. Anyway, back to the stories. cuatro. Okay. I'm going to read 3 stories about the origin of death, 3 indigenous stories. In one, the fault is divine. In one, it's human. And in one, it's a demi-human. It's a demigod, right? So it's interesting how there's plenty of blame to go around, right? Native American, the origin of death, the Chirimacha people. Tell them he will have to die. Anciently, there was no death in the world, but finally a man fell sick, and the people sent Rabbit to the Great Spirit to inquire whether he would die. The Great Spirit said, no, he will not die. He will get well. Rabbit started back with this answer, but in his haste he stumbled and fell on his face, and in doing so split his nose in the manner in which it is seen to this day. And unfortunately, this caused him to forget the message he had received. So he retraced his steps and asked the question over again. This time, however, the Great Spirit was angry at being disturbed a second time and said, tell them he will have to die. Since then, there has been death on earth. Note, the above story hews to a common template for explaining our mortality, that we were once immortal, but lost that state due to an error on the part of one of God's emissaries. The capriciousness of the Great Spirit is, in this tale, however, an enjoyable twist. So that would be divine error, because Rabbit worked for the Great Spirit. Origin of death, Melanesia. From that time, mankind ceased to cast their skins. At first, men never died, but when they advanced in life, they cast their skins like snakes and crabs, and came out with youth renewed. After a time, a woman growing old went to a stream to change her skin. She threw off her old skin in the water, and observed that as it floated down, it caught against a stick. Then she went home, where she had left her child. The child, however, refused to recognize her, crying that its mother was an old woman. To pacify the child, she went after her cast skin and put it on. From that time, mankind ceased to cast their skins and died. So that's the human's fault. Now, people know of Maui. He's kind of like the Polynesian Hercules, right? He was a human, but he was a demigod, etc., right? Thanks to the Moana movie. So he's really fascinating. I'm going to read just excerpts from The Death of Maui. And he's kind of a Prometheus figure, too. It's really amazing, his overall story. I'll go ahead and read the epigraph. When man dies, let him go into darkness, become like earth, that those he leaves behind may weep and wail and mourn. There is a Maori saying that states, if Maui had not died, he could have restored life to all who had gone before him, and thus succeeded in destroying death. In Maui's last days, he longed for victory over death. His innate love of life led him to face the possibility of escaping and overcoming the relentless enemy of mankind, and thus bestow the boon of deathlessness upon his fellow men. He had been successful over and over again in his contests with both gods and men. It was not strange that Maui should feel self-confident when considering the struggle for immortality as a gift to be bestowed. And yet his father warned him that his time of failure would surely come. You heard our instructions, but please yourself and persist for life or death. Maui replied, what do I care? Do you think I shall cease? Rather, I will persist forever and ever. Then his father said, there is one so powerful that no tricks can be of any avail. Maui, in these last days of his life, looked towards the west and said, let us investigate this matter and learn whether life or death shall follow. The father replied, there is evil hanging over you. When I chanted the invocation of your childhood, when you were made sacred and guarded by charms, I forgot a part of the ceremony, and for this you are to die. Maui, after his conversation with his father, remembered his conflict with the moon. He had tied her so that she could not escape, but was compelled to bathe in the waters of life and return night after night, lest men should be in darkness when evening came. Maui said to the goddess of the moon, let death be short. As the moon dies and returns with new strength, so let men die and revive again. But she replied, let death be very long, that man may sigh in sorrow. When man dies, let him go into darkness, become like earth, that those he leaves behind may weep and wail and mourn. Maui did not lay aside his purpose. He did not wish men to die, but to live forever. Death appeared degrading and an insult to the dignity of man. and as you can guess, Maui failed. So that would be the half-human. It's here somewhere. Okay. So that's a smattering of Origin of Death. There are certain patterns that repeat over and over again, which I think is fascinating. Totally different parts of the world, isolated societies, that kind of thing. Okay. I have some old urban legends too. I like the kind where it's like, no, this really happened down the street, right? It's not just, quote unquote mythology. So the manor house at Bampton from England. After her death, the place was haunted. This is really short. The manor house at Bampton was for many years occupied by a family of the name of Whitaker. About 100 years back, it appears that one of them, a married man, was very sweet on a maid in the town. Mr. Whitaker's wife remonstrated with him in vain, and it ended in her dying of a broken heart. After her death, the place was haunted by her spirit, and it was laid in a pond. Later on, the pond dried up, and Mrs. Whitaker came again. And so strong was the ghost that they were obliged to lay her again, this time in a barrel of strong beer, which was walled up in the cellar. There the barrel is to this day. So one of the themes that comes out in a lot of stories is that a spirit can be trapped or stopped by water. So if you think of Lord of the Rings, the Nazgul can't cross the river. When they try, it goes badly for them. And in original vampiric tales, right, they can't cross a river. So you see that a lot. This is the only instance of alcohol that I found being used to trap the spirit. Speaking of alcohol. Seven. This is a really beautiful story. I wanted something from the Judeo-Christian tradition that was a little more off the beaten path than the death and resurrection of Christ, right? So I found this story. Hopefully you have not heard it. The Bridegroom and the Angel of Death. I don't know why this story moved me so much every single time I read it, but it does. Now, I'm going to set the table here and skip a bunch. There's a young man whose father is rude to the Angel of Death, who's in disguise. So God decrees that that man's son has to die as punishment. Not the man, but the man's son. And the young man is about to get married. So Elijah the prophet shows up and gives the son an out. Like, this might work when the angel shows up. Then the angel of death shows up. They start talking. The lad replied. So he's talking to the angel of death again, who's in human guise. The lad replied, I wish to do thee honor. At which the angel replied, may he to whom honor belongs have compassion on thee. He then went out and sat by the door of the canopy, and the lad sat in front of him. He said, my son, I will ask thee a question. The lad replied, ask. He then said, a man borrowed from his neighbor a barn full of straw. He then took the straw and placed it in clay, and with it built a large house. After some time, the owner of the straw came and said, return to me the straw that I lent you. What should he do? The lad said, he should give him other straw instead. But if, said the angel, he will not take any except his own, what should he do? The lad replied, he should then break down his house, place the bricks in water, dissolve them, and extracting the straw, return it to him. The angel then said, thou, my son, art the straw, and the body of life is the building. God, who is the owner of the straw, has sent me to take back his straw. He had not finished speaking when the father of the lad came out of the synagogue, sobbing and crying for his child, and prostrating himself before the angel of death, said to him, I entreat thee to take away my life instead of my son's. The angel of death immediately clothed himself with the garments of cruelty, anger, wrath, and severity. And he appeared to him equipped as a warrior going out to battle. He unsheathed his sword and placed his foot upon his neck in order to slay him. At this his limbs trembled violently. He then stood up and fled from before the angel and said, go and take the life of him for whom thou hast been sent. Take it, for I am not able to bear thee. When his old mother saw that, she fell down, and her hair was dragged in the dust. And she said, I entreat thee to take my life instead of that of my offspring. And she was sobbing heavily and weeping. The angel of death immediately clothed himself with the 4 garments of cruelty, and appeared like a warrior going forth to battle. He unsheathed his sword and placed his foot upon her neck to slay her, but she fled from under him, shut the door behind her, and said, Go and take the life of him to whom thou hast been sent to. Take it, for I am not able to bear thee. Go. At that moment the bride of the lad saw the commotion. She descended from her bridal canopy, and falling down, prostrated herself before the angel of death, and said, I entreat thee to take my life instead of that of this young man's, and leave him to complete the term of his life. Life for life will then be literally fulfilled. At this the angel of death immediately clothed himself with the 4 garments of cruelty. He then drew his sword from its sheath, and placed his foot upon her neck. She then said to him, Finish the word of the King of Kings, who hath sent thee. He nearly crushed her 2 or 3 times. She did not stir, but said, Fulfill the word of the King of Kings. The angel of death forthwith had mercy upon her, and a tear of mercy fell upon her from the eye of the angel of death. Then spake God and said, If this cruel one who slayeth people has mercy upon them, shall I, who am called the God of mercy and kindness, not have compassion upon these people? And you'll have to read the rest of the story if you want to know how it ends.
Just getting to the good part.
All right, yeah. Cliffhanger.
It's a marketing ploy. Okay.
So I didn't wait the day job.
I hope you'll appreciate this. You are surely the first people ever to hear this story in English. It's a Venezuelan tale. I'm Colombian American, so I assume the myth, is shared in that general area, that part of South America. I could only find I read real obscure, scanned text, and I found an outline of the story. Even in Spanish, I read Spanish. Even in Spanish, I couldn't find a version of the story. So I only had the outline, so this one I wrote myself. And speaking of shared story DNA, I mean, this has nothing to do with ancient Greece, but it's, it's like an Orpheus type tale. I'm not going to spoil by reading the epigraph this time. And again, first people ever to hear this in English. And I've published I have some of my other folktale books. I'm Colombian. I found a Colombian tale, and even my family and other people in Colombia, I never heard of that. So this one, maybe even in Venezuela, they don't know this story. I don't know. A young man was in love with a beautiful maiden of the village, and she with him. Each day they could be seen exchanging glances as they crossed paths. Though they had not spoken, their feelings were clear, as was the young man's intention to propose marriage as soon as he was able to prove to her father that he would be a good provider. Now, some of the other men were jealous of the youth for having secured the love of this girl, and they followed him into the jungle one day as he went out to hunt. There they shot him with their bows, and he died. The maiden realized something had happened to her love, but did not know what. Then one night he spoke to her as she lay in her family's hut, unable to sleep. She was not frightened by his invisibility, and told him that her love for him had not changed. Are you sure? Yes. Would you like to go away? Would you like to go away with me? Yes. Then make some tami. The young girl went out of the hut and did as he had bidden. The smell of the tami wafted into the steamy night air as it was prepared over a small fire. As soon as she took the draught, the world around her changed. Everything from the huts to the trees was still there, but it was now as if she was viewing it all through a veil. A wisp of cloud and wind hovered nearby, and she knew it was him. He drifted away from the village. She followed. They traveled deep into the night and deeper into the jungle. The girl had no idea where she was, but knew it was somewhere even the hunters of her people had not explored. They eventually emerged into a clearing. In the middle of it sat the most magnificent house she had ever seen. It was far grander than that of even their chief. As they moved up the path, she noticed that the ground on either side was shifting. Looking closely, she saw that the grass, almost black in the darkness, was covered with small frogs. It was their movement that made it seem the very earth was in motion. With that, she realized they were at the home of Copecho, the Lord of Frogs. Copecho came out to greet them, impressed that they had found him. They made their plea for help in finding a way to live together. The god squatted on his haunches. His large blank eyes betrayed no thought as he took in their tale. Without a word, he went inside and came out with a bundle of reeds in each green hand. Make me gifts with what I give you. If I am pleased by what you make, I will help. The only way you can be together is in the land of the dead. I can send you there. The wind and cloud coalesced into the ghost of the young man, strengthened by the magic of the place. He fashioned a hat out of his reeds, and she a basket. The young man was more gifted at weaving than the girl. Copetro immediately placed the hat on his enormous head, where it tottered comically, but the god seemed pleased. The girl's basket, meanwhile, was imperfect. She was nervous being in front of a god, and with so much depending on her work. Copetro held up the basket, and his giant frog face twisted into a grimace. Your gift is poor. I will therefore send you each on different paths to the Tayaya, the great wall that encloses the land of the dead. The frogs all croaked in unison and loudly. Suddenly the girl found herself alone and on a jungle path. One look was well enough to let her know it was a wicked place. The twisted trees overhanging the path reached down like clawing talons, and the wood was ominously dark, of a kind she had never seen. As she progressed down the trail, she could hear people screaming, and thought they were the souls of the damned. Unnatural wild beasts moved about under the jungle canopy. They could be heard trampling the undergrowth and snarling. Many a warrior sent down that path over the years had turned back from fear, but she would not be deterred. After enduring this for an entire day, her path converged with another, and the haunting atmosphere was gone. It was here that she met her love, who had been sent down an easy road. He had been waiting for her on the spot, unable to assist. Together they went on until they came to a great stone wall. There was no gate or passage, and the barrier was so tall that it touched the clouds. The ghost grabbed a large knobby branch and began to hammer away. Because of his righteousness, the stones gave way. After passing through their makeshift gap, the young couple found a river. It was like a moat placed strangely on the inside of a castle wall. Being alive, the girl was able to swim across it as if it were any other body of water. The boy could not, try as he might. Just then a dog emerged from some bushes and looked at the lad. He knew the boy had been kind to dogs in his mortal life and offered assistance. He sank into the water, bade the ghost to hold on, and thus ferried the spirit across the river. A short walk away, they found the village of souls. It was populated with regular-looking folk, but they realized these were the spirits of the departed. Without ceremony, they were allowed to move into one of the huts and began their life together as husband and wife. All was not perfect. Although he had form, they knew it would mean her death if their love was consummated. Still, they lived happily together in the land of the dead, as they had not been allowed to among the living. Years passed. The girl grew older and felt the call of the mortal world strengthen over time. Deep down, she longed to see her parents and siblings, and to even one day have children. The lad sensed her longings and understood. She was torn between two worlds, while he was not. After discussing things, they decided their time together should end. She would return to their village and he would stay. Each was thankful for the time they'd had, a time which would now end, so she could live out her natural life. He warned her that she was not to discuss the land of the dead with the living. She returned home without incident, and her family was elated to see her. They could hardly contain their joy, and the entire village wondered at how she could have survived so long in the jungle on her own. A great feast was held to celebrate her return. There, she drank the fermented drink that all adults did during festivities. Letting herself get inebriated, she ended up confessing the details of her adventure. Her family was shocked, but thanked the gods she had returned. Others, however, ran to the shaman, saying that she was a witch and would bring misfortune to the village. The next morning, the girl realized what she had done, and that the entire village was abuzz with the news of her voyage. Distraught, she knew she had broken her promise, and that now she would bring misery onto her family. Quickly saying goodbye to her parents, brothers, and sisters, she struck off into the forest. The girl was determined to once more brave the path to the village of souls. There was no knowing if she'd be allowed back in after divulging the secret to that place. Perhaps she would not be allowed to find it. Perhaps even upon dying, she would be barred from joining the community of the dead. What ended up happening to her, we cannot say. So, now for a story break. This book has the largest collection of death superstitions. I created the largest collection that I could find, so I'm not aware of a larger one. And they're pretty fun. You have to feel sorry for people who saw themselves as responsible for somebody dying at every turn, because they dropped something, you name it, right? But just as guilty as humans were animals. Those damn animals caused lots and lots of people to die by misbehaving. For instance, I'll do this one first. This is not along those lines, but quick show of hands, who knows about the tradition, upon a death in the family, you have to inform the bees on the property? Anyone?
Only because you told me.
Okay. Anyone who knew that, you can get a skull at the end. Telling the bees. I love this one because this one's like just so obtuse. It's so mysterious. Telling the bees, a remarkable custom brought from the old country, formerly prevailed in the rural districts of New England. On the death of a member of the family, the bees were at once informed of the event. United States. Instead of speaking to the bees, it was the custom in some parts of Wales to turn the beehive round before starting the funeral. This was always done by the representative of the family and was thought to be a protection against death. Mrs. Jones of the rectory informed me that an old man, David Roberts, once came to her in deep grief after the funeral of his grandchild because he had forgotten to turn the beehive before the funeral started. He said that he was in such distress that he had neglected to tell the bees of the death, and said some other member of the family is now sure to go. Different source. Sometimes a family member informed the bees of the homeowner's death by rapping on the hive 3 times with an iron key and saying, "The master is dead." That last tradition made worldwide news semi-recently, when Queen Victoria died. The royal beekeeper had to go on the property and tell the bees. And I was like, you bastards, I had that in my book and nobody knows about it, and now it's all over the internet. The iron touch is interesting too. Iron's a big player in ghosts, etc. So one that I won't read from, but one thing you do in certain countries when somebody died in the house, you had to take a piece of iron and stick it into every piece of food or liquid, every potable liquid, every piece of food, to protect against another death. So something about iron. And this is also not in the book, but in a picture essay I did, which is free. Ask me for the link later. I did for my Kickstarter backers. Stakes through vampires' heart, like real stakes in real corpses' hearts, were actually usually iron and not wood. So they found corpses with this big old iron stake stuck through the heart. So something about the iron that comes from the earth. Yes?
Just a little clip, because I'm a metal geek. Lead coffins.
Uh-huh.
It's so they're in case of they don't move around and get restless, because if they get restless, then they want to come out and the wood, and then they come out. And,
To keep them from escaping.
Yeah, and the thing with the iron is I don't know how to word it, sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, we'll talk about it later.
Yeah.
Okay, birds. Hammerkop. The Hottentots. Hottentot is like a colonizer term for certain people in Africa, so I apologize. The Hottentots, I couldn't figure out the right, The Hottentots believed that in the same way that they can see their reflections mirrored in still water, a hammerkop bird can see reflections of the future and knows who is shortly going to die. When the bird sees the image of a person with death overshadowing him, it will fly to the home of the doomed and utter its 3 warning cries. Hen. Ladies, you're really going to like this one. Hen. A hen crowing like a rooster foretells death, and it is immediately killed. We find the same superstition among the southern Greeks, modern Albanians, ancient Romans. And this was from Macedonia. Southwestern Africa. A crowing hen would be killed immediately, as it was said to be cursing the family and would cause one of the members to die. So here's the part for the ladies. Here's a traditional rhyme from Europe. A whistling woman and a crowing hen are neither fit for God nor man. So, my hypothesis. The last 3 quotations presumably stem from an apprehension to a female doing something that is the male's duty. Given that, we can see how the traditional rhyme about the women came to be as the sexism was then transferred from avian to human females. Meanwhile, laying eggs was another problem. This is ironic, given that doing so is strictly the female's territory. Should a hen lay a small egg, it was to be thrown over the head and over the roof of the house, or else a death would follow. Sometimes these things are very abrupt, and I find them funny because of that. This is the entire quotation from England. Pigeon house. Unlucky to pull one down. Your wife will die. Crickets and any chirping insect. Regarding the sound of crickets chirping inside of a house, in one part of the country it will be seen the chirping of the cricket presages death in the family. In another part of the country, it means good luck. It's not real consistent logic.
Death might be good luck in that case.
Right person.
But then, very far away, southern Africa, the incessant chirping of a locust on the roof of one particular hut meant that a relation had died, and efforts were made to kill the insect. In ancient Rome, if an owl was hooting in the wrong way, you had to kill it and nail it to the door of the house. Also yes, like I said, poor animals. This is from India. A dog barking on the roof of a house during the dry weather portends an epidemic. There is a proverb, like a dying dog climbing the roof, which is said of a person who is approaching his ruin. The omen also signifies the death of several members of the family. Kind of slightly related, Fox. I get to quote my own book, by the way. I have a copy of Fox and Global Chronicles here somewhere. Being bitten by a fox means you will die within 7 years. At the time he was dying, foxes were seen about the house and coming towards the house for some days. At the death of Edward XIII, foxes were also there. He had been rather better one day, but the foxes appeared, and he died that night, contrary to expectation. On the day before my grandfather died, the foxes came from all the country round. Excerpts from a legend that foxes predict and mourn the passing of each Viscount of Gormanston Castle due to one of them saving a hunted vixen and her cub in the late 17th century. My wife.
Where is that legend from?
Ireland, sorry, thank you. Yeah, please, whenever I skip something, just ask. That's Ireland. Horses. I'm just going to do one. There's a lot about horses. 3 horses of the same color indicate death. But this is a sign not very noticeable in a thickly settled community. New York. And there's a great blues song, See That My Grave Is Kept Clean, by Blind Lemon Jefferson. And you can see there's all kinds of 3 colors, 2 colors, whatever, but horses the same color. 1928, I think, Blind Lemon Jefferson, great song, See That My Grave Is Kept Clean. Well, it's 2 white horses in a line. Well, it's 2 white horses in a line, gonna take me to my burying ground. So that thought made it all the way into 20th century music.
Where's that from?
That song is an old blues song.
He said Blind Lemon.
Blind Lemon Jefferson. He might have recorded that in Deep Ellum here.
What about the pale horse?
Yes, pale horses.
Okay.
Like I said, there's a lot of horse stuff. Other than animals, corpse candle. This is from Wales. A light like that of a candle, which was said to issue from the house where death was about to occur and take the course of the funeral procession. But this mysterious light was also thought to wend its way to the abode of a person about to die. I have met with persons in various parts of Wales who told me that they had seen a corpse candle. They described it as a pale bluish light moving slowly along a short distance above the ground. Once, it was seen to go over hedges and make straight for the churchyard wall. This was not then understood, but when the funeral actually took place, the ground was covered with snow, and the drift caused the procession to proceed along the fields and over the hedges and the churchyard wall, as indicated by the corpse candle. Something I say in my intro of the, let me go back and read it. I think it's funny. And it's also a hypothesis of mine. Oh, sorry, not the animals. Okay. Let's start. Now let's sample the many foreboding signs that come from somewhere other than the world of beasts. Once again, the underlying dynamic is at times fear of the unusual and out of place. For instance, umbrellas were meant to be opened and used outdoors. Opening one indoors and standing under it is therefore a perversion of normalcy. And now something terrible must happen. That's the logic you see a lot. It has also been speculated that some superstitions were partly or wholly meant to discourage bad behavior, especially in children. So keep that in mind as we jump to chairs. Chair. Twirling a chair will cause a death of a member of the family. Rocking an empty chair means illness or death to the next one sitting in it. Our last 2 entries touch on the mentioned hypothesis that certain superstitions were meant to keep children in line. One can easily imagine a child performing either of these activities in their natural restlessness, and parents wanting a suitably terrifying warning to stop them from doing so. One more. If you go into a room where no one has been and find the rocking chair rocking, there will be a death in your family. That one at least makes sense. We can all agree that's creepy. Right? That one makes sense. Don't twirl the chair if someone's gonna die. It's just because you want your kid to stop doing it.
Well, wouldn't that be like the spirit waiting impatiently?
Yeah, I'm waiting. Yeah.
Yeah. That's what I would like.
This is from Ireland. The Doulahan. This is a most gruesome thing. He has no head, or carries it under his arm. Often he is seen driving a black coach, called Coachabauer, drawn by headless horses. It rumbles to your door, and if you open it, a basin of blood is thrown in your face. It is an omen of death to the houses where it pauses. No kidding. Such a coach not very long ago went through Sligo in the gray of the morning, as was told me by a sailor who saw it. In one village, I know its rumbling is said to be heard many times in the year. So how's that not in movies? That's great. Okay, speaking of coffins, this goes along the lines that you were mentioning.
Okay.
Speaking of, I'm just going to read one. Speaking of carpenters, if a sudden and unaccountable light was seen in a carpenter's shop, it indicated that he would soon have to make a coffin. Also, a carpenter generally knows when a death is about to take place, for he hears about him movements and creaking of boards. This is the wraith or genius of the fated person, who is particular about selecting proper timber for the coffin. That's from Nova Scotia. There's a charming little tale where a woman tells this other woman, no, you have to hear it, come here. And she believes she heard it. And then speaking of the old blues, one day I want to write a book about the old blues. Also from, I had to restrain myself, also from See That My Grave Is Kept Clean. Have you ever heard a coffin sound? Have you ever heard a coffin sound? Have you ever heard a coffin sound? Then you know that poor boy is in the ground. I don't think in English anyone ever used the English language more economically, and to more effect than like the real early blues. Real simple couplets, simple languages, so powerful. Okay, what else?
Lead Belly.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah.
Another song, if you want to look it up, is I was gonna try to play it, but I don't know what's gonna happen if I try it. Blind Willie McTell, You Was Born to Die. And the refrain is, you made me love you and you made me cry. You should remember that you were born to die. And then it's really great because if you really examine the lyrics, it's more of a threat than a statement about death. Okay. 1 second and a few more stories. Okay, left off on 9. Yes. Oh, I really like this. Here's some Aztec lore about death. This was translated, and written down by a Victorian scholar. So I personally really appreciate his description of Mexican religion at the time, mythology, whatever you want to call it. The powers of death, Mexico, Aztec. I really love this sentence. The epigraph is, our existence is as a ray of the sun. Earth, the great mother, is a giver of life. But Earth, the cavernous, is lord of death. The Mexicans are second to no people in the grimness of their representations of this power. My kids are half Mexican American. As the heart of the mountain, I'll skip. As the Earth's cavern, it is the spotted jaguar monster, which leaps up out of the west to seize the declining sun, and its roars may be heard in the echoing hills. As lord of the earth, it is the hideous toad with gaping jaws, which must be nourished with the blood of sacrificed men. But the grimmest figure, is that of Hades himself. Mictlantecutli, I was practicing this a lot. Mictlantecutli, the skeleton god of the dead. Also called, says Sagahun, he of the falling hair. I think it's a great poetic way to describe the avatar of death. Sagahun describes the journey to the abode of this divinity. When a mortal, man, woman, child, lord, or thrall, died of disease, his soul descended to Mictlan, and beside the corpse, the last words were spoken. Our son, thou art finished with the sufferings and fatigues of this life. It hath pleased our Lord to take thee hence, for thou hast not eternal life in this world. Our existence is as a ray of the sun. He hath given thee the grace of knowing us and of associating in our common life. Now the God Miklan Tekutli, I'm going to skip some of the names, he's got a lot of names, hath made thee to share his abode. We shall all follow thee, for it is our destiny, and the abode is broad enough to receive the whole world. Thou wilt be heard of no longer among us. Behold, thou art gone to the domain of darkness, where there is neither light nor window. Never shalt thou come hither again, nor needest thou concern thyself for thy return, for thine absence is eternal. Gets even more depressing. Thou dost leave thy children poor and orphaned, not knowing what will be their end, nor how they will support the fatigues of this life. As for us, we shall not delay to go join thee, where thou wilt be. Then the body was wrapped, mummified, and a few drops of water were poured upon the head. Lo, the water of which thou hast made use in this life, and a vessel of water was prepared. This for thy journey. So I love that. Think of the coins, or that kind of thing, right? And there's a lot of this for thy journey. Just get ready. Next, certain papers were laid before the body in due order. This is the most complex ritual I'm aware of, where you're preparing the body for the trip that has to be taken in the afterlife. And that's another common theme. You die and you're not done. You have to journey and get to the right place. And there's perils that might cause you to go off kilter or the wrong place. Go ahead.
Tibetan Book of the Dead. That's what that's all about.
Absolutely. And then, this totally insular Mesoamerican society from the other side of the world. So these are the things being given, right, to the corpse. Lo, with this thou shalt pass the two clashing mountains. With this thou shalt pass the road where the serpent awaiteth thee. With this thou shalt pass the place of the green lizard. Lo, wherewithal thou shalt cross the 8 deserts and the 8 hills. And behold, with what thou canst traverse the place of the winds that bear obsidian knives. Thus the perils of the underworld were to be passed, and the soul, arrived before Miklan was, after 4 years, to fare on until he should arrive at Chiconawapan, the ninefold stream of the underworld. Across this he would be borne by the red dog, which, sacrificed at his grave, to the dog, had been his faithful companion, and thence master and hound would enter into the eternal house of the dead. Chiconamitlan, the 9th hell. And there's way more. It goes on and on. There's all these different levels. I find that really fascinating, but skip ahead to my commentary. Note, a dog taking the deceased across the ninefold stream reminds us of our Venezuelan tale. In both legends, the dog is not just a generic psychopomp. A psychopomp is something that escorts you to the afterlife. It specifically assists the soul to cross an underworld river or stream. And then that taps into the far more global tradition we talked about, where water cannot be crossed. And then there's some traditions where it's the exact opposite. Hold on, real quick, I'm going to finish this. It specifically assists the soul to cross an underworld river or stream. Given the general proximity of Central America to the northern part of South America, this is likely not a coincidence.
Well, the Journey of Hades, where the actual Grim Reaper, I found out was an oar, because he was the one that brought you into Hades across the...
And you need, like in Greek mythology, you need Charon to take you across the river Styx.
Yeah.
The Aborigines in Australia believed that when you died, you passed through the bottom of the ocean and went to a faraway land. So when the colonizers, the white colonizers, first arrived, they believed firmly these were their reincarnated dead coming back. And when asked to explain the change in color, they thought they got bleached by the ocean as they passed through.
Too much salt.
A lot of salt. Okay, how about some Druid lore? 50 years before Christ, Caesar, in writing to his countrymen about the Gauls and the Druids, said that one of their prime teachings was that men's souls never die, but pass over death from one life to another. And their opinion is, adds Caesar, that this doctrine greatly tends to the arousing of valor, all fears of death being despised. So when it comes to Druidic beliefs, quote, many folklorists tell of illusions as to where the dead have gone. Some say they've gone to a world under the sea, others to a world inside of the hills, others to islands off on the sea. So I love the idea that heaven and hell are physically in the same geography that we are. Right? You can't get to it when you're mortal, but that's what happens. You travel to this place that's kind of on the same plane that we are. And if you think about like leprechauns and all kinds of fairy folk, they were the mound people. So like these whole worlds inside of a hill. And that's great. That shows up in Tolkien too. The barrow wit is inside of a mound. So here's a couple of descriptions of kind of the Celtic, afterlife. This beautiful island, a little bit, Avalon-like that you get to after. There is a distant isle round which seahorses glisten, a fair course against the white swelling surge, lovely land, glittering through beautiful ages. An ancient tree is there with blossoms on which birds call. Unknown is wailing or treachery in this familiar, cultivated land. There is nothing rough, but sweet music striking in the ear. In a different description, it's basically the same thing. There, at the western Medora, in the place where the sun goes down, a stud of steeds with gray and speckled manes, and another of crimson brown. There are at the eastern door 3 ancient trees of crimson crystal, from which sing soft-toned birds. There's a tree in front of the court which cannot be matched, a tree of silver against which the sun shines with golden glitter. So wrapping up here, guys. Well, there it is. Okay, this is a really charming Irish story. I'm only going to read a little bit. It's really long. It's a whole chapter. All my chapters are named after things from one of the stories in that chapter. This time it had to come from that story because it's the only story. It's like 7,000 words, but it's great. So the chapter is chapter 10, Until You're Made to Bury It. And I decided that when you're asking me if I'm a voice actor, no. Do I know how to do accents? No. But this has a lot of like real old-timey Irish isms. It's great. So it's just kind of wimpy to read it in a flat American accent. So forgive me, but here we go. And I work with a lady from Ireland, so I was like, how would you say this? How would you say that? It's like, I have no idea. What words are those? But she did tell me the name would have to be Ty, even though it's not spelled like this anymore. Ty O'Kane and the Corpse, Ireland. The cold corpse whispered in his ear, bury me now, bury me now. So to set the table on this one, there's a lad who's living a bad life. He's fought with his father, and rural Ireland, he goes out to a country road to smoke his pipe and relax, right? And we pick up the story there. As soon as I find the bracket. And you're hearing live coverage of me looking for, I found it. Okay. Musha, I think I forgot myself, says he. It must be near 12 o'clock now. The word was hardly out of his mouth when he heard the sound of many voices and the trampling of feet on the road before him. I don't know who can be out so late at night as this, and on such a lonely road, said he to himself. He stood listening, and heard the voices of many people talking through other. Through other used to mean mixed up. So people talking through other means talking over one another. But he could not understand what they were saying. Oh, Wida, says he, I'm afraid it's not English or Irish they have. It can't be they're Frenchmen. It's got an exclamation mark on Frenchman, so I like the fear of the French. He went on a couple of yards further, and he saw well enough by the light of the moon a band of little people coming towards him, and they were carrying something big and heavy with them. Oh, murder, says he to himself. Sure, it can't be that they are the good people that's in it. Every rib, R-I-B, every rib of hair that was on his head stood up, and there fell a shaking on his bones, for he saw that they were coming to him fast. He looked at them again, and perceived that there were about 20 little men in it, and there was not a man at all of them higher than about 3 feet, or 3.5, and some of them were gray and seemed very old. He looked again, but he could not make out what was the heavy thing they were carrying, until they came up to him. And then they all stood around about him. They threw the heavy thing down on the road, and he saw on the spot that it was a dead body. He became cold as the death, and there was not a drop of blood running in his veins, when a little old gray maneen came up to him and said, Isn't it lucky we met you, Ty O'Kane? Poor Tige could not bring out a word at all, nor open his lips if he were to get the world for it. And so he gave no answer. Tige O'Kane, said the little gray man again. Isn't it time that you met us? Tige could not answer him. Tige O'Kane, says he the third time. Isn't it lucky and timely that we met you? But Tige remained silent, for he was afraid to return an answer, and his tongue was as if it was tied to the roof of his mouth. The little gray man turned to his companions, and there was joy in his bright little eye. And now, says he, Tige O'Kane hasn't a word. We can do with him what we please. Tige, says he, you're living a bad life, and we can make a slave of you now, and you cannot withstand us, for there's no use in trying to go against us. Lift that corpse. Tige was so frightened that he was only able to utter the two words, I won't. For as frightened as he was obstinate and stiff, same as ever. Tige O'Kane won't lift the corpse, said the little manine, with a wicked little laugh, for all the world like the breaking of a lock of dried kippens, and with a little harsh voice like the striking of a cracked bell. Tige O'Kane won't lift the corpse. Make him lift it. And you have to read the book if you want to know how that ends. It's quite long, and it's like I said, it's the charmer. It's the charmer of the group. Okay, this last one. Kind of an uplifting one to end on, I think. This is from Zaire, modern Zaire. Death and Soul. I am going to kill Soul. After the story, I'm going to talk a little bit more, by the way. The Ngabandi of Zaire say that long ago, Death and Soul were enemies. Death used to brag that he could kill Soul. Soul always answered, I will not be killed. Every time Death tried to defeat Soul, something happened to his plans and he failed. One day, Death decided he had a foolproof plan for getting Soul. First, he sent Soul an invitation to come to a feast where they would swear to live at peace forever. Then he called in all his soldiers for a meeting. Now, Soul was somewhat suspicious of Death's real intentions, so he asked his friend Bat to go to Death's town and see what he could learn. I love Death's town, by the way. Bat went and hung upside down under the eaves of Death's roof, where no one noticed him. Soon he heard Death say to his soldiers, Finally, I am going to kill Soul. I have invited him here as my guest. I shall let him sleep in my house, and I shall move into a smaller place so he sees that I want the very best for his comfort. When he is asleep, you, Lightning, will go up to a cloud, and as it passes over the house, you will jump from it onto the place and destroy him. Death's soldiers thought this a very good plan. Bat flew home to tell Soul. Soul arrived at Death's town and was received with great ceremony. Death vacated his house for his honored guest, and everyone but Bat settled down for a good night's sleep. When Bat saw the cloud approaching, he quickly awakened Soul, and they rushed away from the town and back to their home. The house was destroyed totally. Death was ecstatic and ordered a large celebration, especially to honor Lightning, because he had finally killed Soul. Just as they were about to begin, they heard the noises from afar of the celebration Soul had begun because he was saved. Death was so angry and humiliated, he vowed never to have an encounter with Soul again. Since then, the Soul has been immortal. So, final story. Gonna read my conclusion now. Let's see. Okay, the whole family's here. Okay, gonna leave it up to Mom. It's kind of sad, the conclusion. Real quick, one thing I said on the website when they asked me for a blurb was I said, what do you do if a monster is looking for you and has a body part of yours, or something, a possession of yours buried in it? So I'm not going to read one of those stories. I have two Inuit stories, and one of the coolest visuals you'll ever see is just Google image search Tupilak. T-U-P, I have it in that picture, so I was talking about. T-U-P-I-L-A-K. So, like the Haitian zombie is the most famous zombie, but it's not the only one. So the Inuit version, anybody could create. You didn't have to know how to do magic. You just took animal and human body parts and formed it together, and as long as you could chant the right song, which is really interesting, and I feel like it's more of a Western Hemisphere indigenous thing. Native Americans are huge on song. Magic is in song. Anyway, that's interesting. But you sing the right song, and it animates that creature you've created, right? Children, human, animal bones, children bones for some reason are extra good if you can throw some in there. And then you take a possession of the person you want revenge on, and you bury it into the chest of this creature. And then you sing, and it floats down into the water and comes back out, because it's islands, looking for the victim. So just want to mention that in case everybody caught that on the. And again, they look amazing. The little figures they make are just awesome. They're really badass. Okay. The book covers like pretty much the entire world. Sadly, I didn't read anything from East Asia. I've got some in there, but I had to make my choices. Quick drink. Conclusion. An old man, bent double with age and toil, was gathering sticks in a forest. At last he grew so tired and hopeless that he threw down the bundle of sticks and cried out, "I cannot bear this life any longer. Death, come and take me." As he spoke, Death appeared and said to him, "What do you want, old man? I heard you call me." "Please, sir," replied the old man, "would you kindly help me lift this load of sticks onto my shoulder?" Thousands of years later, Aesop's fable, The Old Man and Death, still makes people laugh. It didn't make you people laugh, but it makes me laugh. Back in our introduction, we talked about humor's role in some of our tales. It is good that we can laugh about something that also inspires such heartache. And it's a strange species indeed that can use such diametrically opposed methods as laughing and crying to deal with the same subject, our conclusion. Laughter often occurs at celebrations, and celebrating is a related tactic. In my parents' native Colombia, the city of Barranquilla's annual carnival is one of the largest of its kind on earth, Carnival. UNESCO named it a masterpiece of the oral and intangible heritage of humanity. The celebration has European roots via the same process that ended up producing Mardi Gras in the United States. And here we are at that time of year, Lent is about to end, here comes Easter. The Barranquilla version, that includes a lesser-known practice referred to as burying the carnival. Has anybody ever heard of burying the carnival? Excellent. Tom Waits has a song where he name drops burying the carnival. The Barranquilla version of this is the ritualistic and comical burying of a character named Joselito, a kind of mythical town drunk. Funerals are held with outrageous faux mourning by revelers, many dressed as his pregnant widow. A mockery is made of one of the worst experiences anyone goes through in life. Saying goodbye for the last time. The end of the festivities is thus marked by burying a personification of the good times. Sticking to the Latin world, Dia de los Muertos is perhaps the most famous confluence of celebration and mourning there is. Parties are had, but people also leave remembrances of and offerings to their departed family members. Those who keep this facet of the holiday alive leave tables at churches laden with pictures of the deceased, homemade food, favorite objects, and more. It is a deeply moving experience to view these temporary altars, as my family does each year while we add our own offering. However, back at the parties, fun is had and death is once again mocked, as the breathing live it up while painted up as the dead. In our introduction, we discussed how White Antelope and Petrarch were motivated to action by knowledge of their oncoming ends. The former to accept his nobly, the latter to achieve what he could while he could. Our two celebrations extol us to do something else, to celebrate and embrace life while we can, both for the living and the dead. Thank you. Anybody has any questions or anything? I'm here, yeah.
I was wondering, you were talking about the rhymes, the limerick, ring around the rosy pocket full of rosy, ashes down, all fall down, the whole Black Death, that when they burned the bodies, they put posy on there to keep the smell.
And survived centuries and centuries and centuries. Yeah, absolutely.
I used to sing that as a kid, and then when I got older and somebody told me, what it's about, I'm like,
that's depressing.
Well, it just freaked me out because I'm sitting there like, but I was so cheery and singing it like a.
Go ahead.